Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us here today. First of all, I'd like to introduce my co-panelist, Terry Ehling. He's actually on Zoom now, but she's in Boston. She's had her back, but she is Director of Strategic Initiatives at the MIT Press. She began her publishing career at MIT in 1983, and before returning to the press last fall, making stops at Cornell University Library, where she was the Executive Director for Project Euclid, and at Project Muse, where she was the Associate Director. In terms of the project that we're going to talk about this afternoon, working closely alongside her has been Erica Lehman, who is the Metadata Associate at the MIT Press. So she assists with developing, implementing and maintaining metadata standards and workflows to help the press become a more metadata-informed publisher. She holds an MLIS from Simmons College and is now bringing her LIS experience to the metadata challenges within scholarly publishing. So what I'd like to do today is, first of all, take you through a little bit about the technology. Then I'm going to hand over to Terry, if my Wi-Fi holds out. And I'd also just like to say, if people wouldn't mind staying off Wi-Fi in the room, that's actually going to improve our connection with Terry in Boston. So that would be great. I haven't got a hardwire connection here on the same network as you. But Terry will take us through some publisher use cases around breadth, depth, growth, topic granularity, concepts, and some keywords. And then we have lots of time at the end for questions. So if you need to stop at any point, do just put your hand up. But if not, we'll open for questions at the end. So before I hand over to Terry, I'd like to talk a little bit about the technology. So very specifically, what we do at Yewno is we use AI technology, which is a blend of computational linguistics, graph theory, and machine learning. And the key thing about our product and our technology is that we've recreated a neural network model. And so our blend of AI understands context and meaning. So what you can see on the left-hand side here is millions of diverse sources of unstructured data. And so we take huge volumes of unstructured data every day, and we read those algorithmically. And from that, what our technology is doing is identifying meaning in the form of concepts. Those concepts are then promoted, they're paired with a definition that we find from a published source, and then they become part of an enormous graph network. And the key thing about using an enormous graph network is that a graph is a fantastically flexible mathematical instrument that anyone can interrogate in any way that is useful to them. And within a graph, every single link has meaning and carries a weight. And it's important to point out that in this graph network, we at Yewno don't own any content and we don't sell any content, so it's all done in a very unbiased way. And on the right, what we're trying to show here is that we've ingested information across a huge different domains of information. So whether it's economics, whether it's science, whether it's humanities, it can all be understood. And I think the key thing about what we're trying to do is to help people find what they're looking for from the overwhelming volumes of information today and the very fragmented sources of information. So in terms of the specific approach that we're going to talk about today, this project goes back over a year to a conversation I had with Amy Brand at the MIT Press. And I was talking to her about our technology and how it worked, and the fact that we read every single line, every single sentence of every single text. And she said, well, when your algorithms are reading every single line of every single document, maybe you could help me with our categorization data. She said some of it's quite high level, and actually it would be great to get more depth and topics and subtopics. And also some of our keywords, maybe they have 5 or 8 keywords, and maybe it'd be useful to have more. So I went back to our office, and at that time that was not what our algorithms were doing. As I mentioned, they were identifying meaning in the form of concepts and promoting those into a graph network. But we talked about this, and actually, responding to Amy's query, it made a lot of sense as we were reading the documents. So in addition to identifying concepts and building a graph network, we can adopt a topic model. So we can identify, as we read the documents, this categorization. So if you look at the picture on the screen, you can see here that as we're reading a paragraph of text, we can categorize all of that text as different topics. And then you can have subcategories beneath that, and topics are nested in a hierarchical approach. And we've trained a dense hierarchical topic model using fast LDA. So that's really all I wanted to say in terms of the background and the technology behind what we do. And what I'd like to do now is hand over to Terry, who's going to give a little bit of an introduction to the project and then talk through some slides. So Terry, over to you for publisher use cases.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Ruth. Yes, we have a number of use cases that we've been developing. As we said, this is a 6-month project. We're about 2/3 of the way through. And so what we're presenting to you today are really the results of our initial explorations, the R&D that we have been doing using about 2,500 titles, MIT Press titles, that have been made available to us. Originally sent to the Discover product that Yewno has, but are now available on Unearth. So the first one has to do with breadth and depth. And this is an example here of really where I think Yewno begins to shine for us. We developed our own taxonomy at the press about a year or so ago when Erica arrived. We decided that because we're, in a sense, a classic STEAM publisher, we do science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And we decided that it would probably be in our own best interest to have our own taxonomy, and she developed that for us. Where that falls short, though, we have found out, is on the backlist. And our backlist is significant. About 2/3 of our list is older than 3 years, and much of it is out of print. But we haven't done that justice over the years in being able to classify and categorize that. So mapping old codes to the new taxonomy turned out to be challenging, again, particularly for the backlist. And so Yewno's topic hierarchy, in a way, works much the same way as our own taxonomy does. So the mirroring and the mapping was good for us. And so one of the best use cases that we have was to facilitate, with Yewno, to facilitate better mapping of titles in our taxonomy so that we can utilize more of the potential in our own system, in a sense, filling in the gaps. So examples here on the slide, we have in our taxonomy, we have a category for genetics and genomics, which is in the subtopic biomedical sciences. The topic didn't exist in our old system, so identifying titles to map was actually impossible. And as of right now, we only have one title identified in this area, because that one was actually manually assigned. But Yewno has genetics and genomics as a subtopic as well, and they identified 21 of our titles being in this category. And again, those were 20 titles that we would have missed and not classified properly. On the next slide, under growth, we have another interesting use case here. We wanted to leave room for growth in our own taxonomy, which only goes down to a sub-level. So there's a top level and a sub-level, so 2 levels down. But in certain areas, we felt that we had some books, or were moving to acquire more, but didn't have enough to warrant inclusion in the taxonomy yet. So these are topics that, in fact, in manuscripts that are coming in that are far more granular than the existing taxonomy that we have. So in these situations, or in these use cases where a subtopic was just overlooked for whatever reason, Yewno actually was able to help us find areas in our list that we might want to add to our own taxonomy. So here are a few examples of Yewno's topics where we had a lot of books, but these topics weren't covered in our own taxonomy. So for instance, estimation theory, which is a subtopic of mathematics in Yewno with 131 titles. It's not being captured at all in our taxonomy, nor in BISAC, nor in keywords. Activism is another case here. It's a subtopic of political science in Yewno with 83 titles of ours that, of course, we weren't able to surface at all because activism is not part of our taxonomy. And workplace culture is a subtopic of business and economics in Yewno, and they identified 68 of our titles that fell into that subtopical category. Another example is fashion, which is an interesting example because that topic did not actually exist in our old system. But the MIT Press hasn't really emphasized fashion design as part of our list in the past. So even though this topic was mappable from the old system, the code had not been well utilized in that system. And Yewno identifies 11 titles in their fashion subtopic, 2 of which we had already identified, which meant that 9 had not. And the last example is developmental psychology, which is a subtopic in our taxonomy, but that's the deepest level we go. This one has the same mapping issues as genetics in that we have 0 titles in this category, but Yewno has 24. And those 24 titles identified by Yewno represent 18% of our entire psychology list. So that's a significant number. Topic granularity in art. Again, you'll see on the left how we taxonomize the arts for MIT Press and how Yewno does it on the right. Unearth can identify topics that we actually don't want to add or may not want to add until later, but could still be useful for sales and marketing. So these might be areas in our list that we don't want to highlight, or facet of topics that are too specific to warrant calling out, or topics that we just choose to represent differently in ways that align better with our list recognition. So examples on the left are taxonomy for the arts, and on the right is Yewno's. MIT has categories for modern, contemporary, and for form, for instance, dance and theater. But Yewno's hierarchy captures things like Nazi period, a very specific period of art history that we don't capture, and painting, which is a different way of categorizing books that we would recognize only by period. Another example is in music. Again, left and right, MIT on the left, and Yewno on the right. We have, Yewno has a separate topic for music, which has several subtopics of its own, and all of this granularity it's really at a level that we just don't have, but could be useful to us and could be interesting. In other words, we don't feel at this point that it's necessary, but having surfaced this and revealed a different set of subtopics can actually be useful in a couple of different use cases around marketing and acquisition, so I'll talk about it in a minute. But for instance, if we wanted to find everything about rap music, which we don't classify at all, that's where Yewno really shines. So if anyone's curious, there are 5 MIT Press books about rap, according to Yewno. We never would have identified those titles at all in our corpus. And then this is particularly interesting for us, which is medicine. This is another great example of Yewno's granularity. We categorize medicine as a subtopic of the biomedical science, and with us, medicine has no subtopics of its own. That's as far down as we go. But Yewno has medicine as a main topic with 77 subtopics, and of those 77 subtopics, MIT Press has at least one title in 55 of them. That's incredibly granular and far beyond what we could feasibly do with our own taxonomy. And finally, this is an interesting use case around a book that will be forthcoming. So Yewno identifies concepts for us, something we don't do at all. And the concepts are actually even more granular than the top hierarchy. They can be things that don't exist in our taxonomy or in BISAC, and they may also not be in our keywords. And they could still be concepts that are interesting to our readers. So they could potentially be concepts to highlight in our list under certain cases. MIT Press has a series called Essential Knowledge. These are short books on very particular topics that are of great currency right now. They're very accessible. They're considered trade books, very concise. Some of these topics covered do fit neatly in the BISAC categories, like the mind-body problem or computing. Those are 2 books in that series. But the majority of these books cover narrow or, in fact, emerging topics that are not represented by BISAC. And many of them are Yewno concepts, though, like free will, school choice, or the Internet of Things. Again, all books that we published recently. One of our essential knowledge books is coming out this fall. It's called Spaceflight. When it releases, if the marketing team wants to send out an email promotion featuring this book and highlighting some of the related backlist titles, all they have to do is search in Unearth for the concept spaceflight, and there's a dynamically generated list of 6 books. So trying to pull together a list like this on your own would require several searches across multiple fields and lots of narrowing and expanding parameters and eliminating false positives. You'd have to search titles, subtitles, and it would take you a great deal of time and manual effort to actually surface something that's important in that way. So those, I think, are some of the key use cases that we've developed right now. We'll be working on more over the next couple of months, but we're actually thrilled with the results that we've gotten so far. This is a way of revealing topics and concepts that we would not have been able to identify efficiently either through machine processes that we have available in the press, or certainly not on a random basis. So do you want to add anything to that?
I'm just on the last slide now, Terry, the bonus keywords.
Oh, yes. So the other thing is that we can do is with books, like this is a case of a book that is in, I think we threw the example in Amazon, and these keywords, to give you an example, could actually be valuable. So although Yewno doesn't focus in specifically on keywords, it can be useful in surfacing keywords and applying keywords for us. So the simplest and easiest way for a publisher to use the information that Yewno creates into Ruth Discovery is to use some of the topics that surface during Yewno Discovery process over your text, and to use them as keywords. So that's the example up here. Again, this is the book, the keywords appearing in the open form field on Amazon, and these would be entirely appropriate as keywords that could be used in your own catalog environment.
Great, so that is the last slide in terms of Terry's case studies, and what I was going to do is just wrap up in terms of the future and where we see things going. So one of the things that is super useful once you've read the book and you've been able to categorize it by topic and subtopic, once you've identified all of the concepts, you can also take an unbiased and very strategic look at everything you've published. If you want to compare whether it's at topic level or at concept level by year, you can look at exactly what you've published by each kind of topic, subtopic or concept. And that can be super useful from a strategic perspective in terms of influencing where you go in the future. So you might have a perception based on a topic hierarchy that is quite high level, that you've done an awful lot in one area, and actually you're missing maybe some of the granularity that you have in other areas of your portfolio. So this can be really useful in terms of providing some reporting that enables strategic decision making and a really, really granular understanding of actually what you do have in your portfolio today. So that was all I was going to say in terms of the future roadmap, but what I'd like to do now is hand over and back to the audience for any questions that people would like to ask. Oh, I think we have one in the back.
Hi, that was really interesting. My question was, do you get a lot of false positives, and also does that matter? Because, you know, a human can sort of, but do you get a lot of false positives?
So I think what's really interesting is going back to how we identify concepts. So what our technology is doing is recreating a neural network model. So it identifies a meaning in the form of a concept, and that is then promoted. But it's not a kind of one-off process. It has to be promoted. It's all done statistically. It has to also be matched with a definition. And then all of these things end up in an enormous graph network. So in the graph, every single connection carries weight, strength, similarity, etc. So it's not actually possible that it could be wrong, if that makes sense. So algorithms do have limitations. And for example, if you gave me 8 words of text, I probably can't do anything with that. We always say it's 160 kind of word limit in terms of a machine being able to read it, understand, identify the context. So very, very short amounts don't work in this technology, but other than that, you can actually track back and get to the source and understand, and you can always see why the connection's there, understand the definition, etc. So no, we don't see that really. Jim.
Thanks, Jim Below from the International Monetary Fund. I'm guessing that MIT was kind of a pilot for this activity. Is it something that you're considering rolling out to other publishers that have their content on the Yewno platform?
Yes, it's been really interesting. So I think the first conversation I had with Amy Brand was sort of in about November 2015. And then we came up with a prototype, which we've been refining. And Terry mentioned we've been doing this project. So we kind of refined the prototype, and then we were looking for specific use cases. So we know what our technology can do. We're a technology company, but we're not publishers. So what we've been doing is working very closely with MIT Press to kind of understand the challenges that people face today. But yes, it's absolutely something that you can apply to any content set, going back to the minimum number of words. That's the only limitation really. And currently we do English, German and Chinese content, so it would have to be in one of those 3 languages. But yeah, it would be something that's available to all publishers.
Hi there, I'm Amanda from Crossref, and I'm just interested in your taxonomy,
Yeah.
funnily enough. whether that's a unique Yewno one or whether that's a kind of shared one.
So we're very happy to share it with you if you would like a copy. So we have 33 topics and about 800 subtopics. And when we started the project, we did start looking at all kinds of taxonomies. And I think we found I think it was over 100. And we decided that we would build our own. So using unsupervised machine learning, we've generated it, and it's based on over 200 million items of text. But we will share it with you, and what we do sometimes find is that publishers map against it, so you might use slightly different terminology, but it is broad. Our topics and subtopics are broadly similar to the definitions you would find in BISAC, but it's not an exact match.
Cool. Great, thank you.
But I'm really happy to share that, so if anyone wants it, just drop me an email.
Hi, Hannah Heckner at Science Magazine. This MIT case study was really helpful, and but I think it, understandably, it was focused more on business case studies, thinking about purchasing and then also gap analysis in the business office. I feel like a big need is to have consistent taxonomy throughout the entire life cycle of a manuscript from submission to eventual purchase or subscription. So are there case studies that you can talk about where the Yewno topics and subtopics were utilized throughout that process?
That's a good question. I don't think we've done that with MIT Press yet. So what I would say is just to cover off on concepts. A concept is an atomic unit of information, and it's paired with a definition, so it's different from a keyword in that way. So if I say to you tertiary fever, I'm actually talking about malaria. If I say Nurofen, I'm actually talking about ibuprofen. So in our world, because a concept is this unique atomic unit of information, it has to have a definition. You could have sort of 5 keywords that would match the same thing. So concepts are consistent all the way through, and I think one of the key things about that is that the algorithms actually have learned to read and understand, and therefore, if you were to publish something new, it was a new concept, had just been published, it didn't exist, it doesn't matter that you haven't fed some kind of static taxonomy that's looking to find words, because it can understand that that is a concept and it can promote it. What I would say is if publishers want to, they can apply their own topic hierarchy. I'm not sure that I would necessarily advise that, only because if there's over 100, you've got to question why that is in the first place. But I'm happy to work through a case study if you're interested. Any other questions? Oh, we have one in front.
Would it be possible ever, I'm sorry, Harlan McKenna, Pup Factory, would it be possible ever to inspect a little deeper in the graph to get more fine-grained relationship between content items? Is that something that would be possible?
So a concept is sort of the lowest level of granularity in the sense that a concept has a unique definition, but what exactly do you mean?
So if I was looking at an article that had mapped to several concepts, right, would it be possible to map that into other articles?
Similarity or mapping, yes.
Yeah, similar mapping, more granular to this, the taxonomy or topics.
Yes, and there's a couple of things you can do around similarity mappings, and there are a few choices you can make. So you might want to map the similarities by topic or subtopic percentage. You might want to map them by concepts. And again, yes, you can do both of those things.
Tim Martin from OCLC. From an MIT perspective, taking these, you've done all this work, are you adding these into your metadata that you're distributing, like you said, to Amazon and others, or putting this type of information into MARC records that you distribute out to libraries? Are you seeing increased usage because of it, or what?
So we at Yewno don't own content, and we don't sell content. Right. So when we do this, we provide that, and this is in this case to MIT Press. So I'll hand over to Terry to talk about how she might use it. Terry?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are, of course, capturing and documenting all of this right now. In the next 2 months, we are going to start doing some specific applications. And that may mean baking it in to our existing metadata schemas that we use. Obviously, Onyx predominates, but we use probably half a different schemas right now, depending on whether we're going out to B2B or B2C channels. So yes, we will be applying this, and we want to apply it throughout the value chain within the press, beginning with acquisitions. How can we help the acquisitions editors actually do some forensic analysis on books that they have already published, to have a better understanding of what markets those books may really appeal to. So those are one of the use cases. The other one is on the off-ramp side of the business rather than the on-ramp side, and that's in marketing. So how can we help marketing do cluster promotion and selling at a much more granular level? Spaceflight Book is a good case in point. When that comes out, they actually may want to do an ad that clusters 2 or 3 books that orbit around, backlist titles that orbit around the Spaceflight Book, but are distinctly related based on the topics that have been surfaced in Yewno, and that again would become part of our metadata. But that is work that's going to be done over the next couple of months.
But it's a really great question, and yes, essentially you could use the concepts to enhance the keywords that you offer to external parties, and then hopefully your content will have greater discoverability. Were there any other questions? Oh yes.
Thanks. Vincent Aziz Francis. If I'm understanding correctly, this pilot with MIT Press was focused on book content.
Yeah.
Have you done any pilots or case studies to use similar technology to classify journal articles?
Yeah, so journal articles, MIT Press is actually adding those soon. We did start off with books because we felt that because books are often so long, people discard them and don't even take them off the shelf because the categorization data is quite high level. But we have moved on to journal articles, and you can apply all of the same things. Journal articles obviously are much shorter in length, but there's nothing that doesn't apply that is applied in this case study. Was there anything specific you were thinking?
I'm just wondering basically if there are any case studies that have been done and what the kind of success rate is, if it's been similar to what you've seen with MIT Press.
I wouldn't expect, from a semantic perspective, any difference in terms of the analysis of text to do with the length, because the minimum length is really only 160 words. So although a journal article is substantially less than a book, and less than a book chapter, there's no reason for it to be particularly different. And one of the reasons we were so delighted to be doing this partnership with MIT Press is that they do have a very broad catalogue. So they do cover a really, really broad collection of different areas. And all of our data has been trained on an enormous interdisciplinary kind of content set for deliberate reasons, because we wanted to make sure that we could understand all different domains of information accurately. Great, I think there was one other question.
Amy Forrester from Data One. I was wondering if you had any thought on leveraging the technology for discovery, using this to help on the customer end or the reader end.
So we have a different product called Yewno Discover, which is really targeted towards higher education and high schools, and it uses concepts and it offers a visual graph interface. And the idea is that you can search for any concept or any topic, and in front of you will display in a kind of graphic visualization all of the concepts that are related. It's totally interactive, everything is clickable, so you can understand concepts, connections, links. You can add up to 8 different concepts to the graph at any one time. So yeah, I'd be really happy to show you if you'd be interested to take a look. Were there any other questions? Oh, we have one from Michael in the front row.
Hi. Not sure if this is for you or Terry, but would you make this analysis of the content available to the consumer?
I think that's a question for Terry. So I'll just explain our commercial position. So from our point of view, we don't own this data, so we provided it as a service to MIT Press, and they own it, and it's really up to them how they use it. The one thing I do know that they're planning to do is the sort of Amazon example of pushing it through the website. But Terry, I don't know if you'd like to comment on how else you think you might be able to use this in user-facing scenarios.
That is a good question. We're still exploring that. Again, it was a 6-month project, and we haven't gotten to the point, we're really on the cusp of, and again, over the next 2 months, we'll be drilling down with some real applications, real-world applications. Right now, the last 4 months have really been about an analysis. How does our taxonomy compare with the topics that Yewno has and has identified, and how do those map with our own taxonomy? How can that help enrich our own taxonomy? I think what would probably happen is that we would write, I would encourage Erica to draft a white paper about this that we could make publicly available, CC BY 5. And then that would allow us to at least share some of the findings that we have and some of the applications that we've applied. But we're very excited about just the level of granularity that we've been able to achieve, and the surprises, frankly, about where some of our books wind up being categorized in ways that we couldn't have imagined before. So Yewno has really been significant for us. This partnership has been very, very fruitful. But you'll be hearing more over the next, probably late summer, early fall, once we have something that we can start brooding about and making publicly.
But I think from our perspective, Michael, there are two options. We do have APIs, so if a publisher wants to take it through an API and then expose it in whichever way is useful to them, we also provide an interface. And I would say that the interface is super useful. The final slide I showed you around metrics is one example of that, but that's useful to people in sort of marketing, strategy, potentially sales for things like list building. So there are two options that we offer.
Yeah, I agree. List building and again, the acquisitions, our department in any case is not particularly data sensitive right now. We're trying to change the culture, and Yewno is helping us do that.
Any final questions from the audience? In which case, thank you very much to Terry for dialing in from Boston. Thank you, Terry, and thank you to everyone for coming.